The opening statement by D.C. John Chapter 1. The 7:45 rule. The morning sun over Manhattan didn't just rise. It hit the glass of the Carson Rivero Tower like a spotlight, turning the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 60th floor into a blinding wall of gold. Inside, the atmosphere was cool, silent, and thick with the scent of expensive floor wax and the low, constant hum of a multi-billion-dollar legal machine. Levy Carson stood in the center of his private office, his back to the door. At 35, he was the youngest managing partner the city had seen in decades. He was a man built of sharp angles and deep silences. Today, he wore a midnight blue velvet blazer over a black silk shirt, the fabric catching the light just enough to reveal the subtle, powerful frame beneath. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the yellow cabs move like blood cells through the city's veins far below. He was waiting. He was always waiting for this specific moment. He checked his titanium watch. The second hand swept past the 12 with a silent, rhythmic grace. 7:45 a.m. The biometric lock on the double oak doors chimed a soft, musical hum that signaled the arrival of the only person allowed past the threshold without a formal appointment. The doors slid open with a weighted, expensive whisper. Levy didn't turn. He had memorized the cadence of those footsteps 10 years ago in a law library at Yale. They were heavy, athletic, and possessed a rhythm of absolute, unshakable certainty. Rocky Rivero entered the room. "The Sterling merger is trending on the terminals, Levi," Rocky said. His voice was a rich, gravelly baritone that seemed to occupy all the empty space in the office. Levi finally turned, a slow, deliberate movement. Rocky stood in the center of the office, looking every bit the legal prince he was born to be. At 35, he carried himself with the rugged charisma of a man who had never been told no. His dark hair was swept back, a few stray strands giving him a calculatedly effortless look. He was dressed in a pinstriped charcoal suit that hugged a frame kept sharp by boxing gyms and the high-stakes stress of the Rivero legacy. Rocky didn't stay at the door. He crossed the vast expanse of the office until he was standing well within Levy's personal space, so close that Levy could smell his cologne, a complex blend of cedarwood and black pepper. In the privacy of this room, Rocky's founding partner mask didn't just slip, it dissolved. His gaze was heavy, searching, and laced with a suffocating, desperate affection. He reached out, his hand hovering near Levy's shoulder. It was a gesture they had repeated for 7 years, a reach that always stopped just short of a full embrace. "The board thinks you're a magician," Rocky whispered, his eyes locked onto Levi's. "I told them you were simply the smartest man I've ever met." "I don't need the board's praise, Rocky," Levi replied, his voice a calm, resonant hum. "I need you to tell me why you looking at me like you saying goodbye." Rocky's jaw tightened. He finally closed the gap, his hand coming up to rest against the back of Levi's neck. His thumb grazed the sensitive skin behind Levi's ear. But as the sun shifted, the light caught the platinum wedding band on Rocky's finger. It glinted, a cold silver barrier that stood between them and the truth. "Camille is hosting the Bar Association Gala tonight," Rocky murmured. "She's invited her cousin, Elena. She thinks you've been alone for too long, Levi. She wants us all to sit at the head table together." "As a family?" Levi pulled back, the warmth of Rocky's hand replaced by a sudden, biting chill. "A head table," Levi said, his back to Rocky again. "How perfect. I spend my days building your family as empire and my nights as a ghost in your bed. And now you want me to sit at a table with a stranger smiling for the cameras, so your wife doesn't have to wonder why her husband's partner hasn't been seen with a woman in years." "Levi, please," Rocky hissed, his eyes darting toward the glass walls, the fear of discovery instantly suffocating the romance. "I am protecting our legacy. I am protecting us." "You are protecting a lie, Rocky," Levi said, turning to face him with eyes as hard as flint. "And I'm starting to wonder if I'm the one being protected, or if I'm just the one being hidden." Chapter 2. The inner circle. The walk to the executive break room felt like a mile-long gauntlet. Levy moved through the main floor of the firm, his presence causing a physical hush to ripple through the rows of busy associates. He was the managing partner. He was the law. But as he reached the glass sanctuary of the lounge, he felt less like a king and more like a man running out of oxygen. The squad was already there, positioned around the marble island like they were awaiting a verdict. Faye, Chris, and Yoko, the only 3 people in the building who knew that the Carson Rivero partnership was a love story written in invisible ink. The managing partner looks like he's about to file a motion to dismiss the entire human race, Faye said, sliding a double-shot espresso across the counter. She was the chief of intelligence, and she saw the microtremors in Levi's hands that he thought he'd hidden from everyone else. Rocky brought up the gala, Chris added, his eyes glued to a transparent tablet. As head of strategy, he saw the world in moves and countermoves. And let me guess, Camille has found a suitable match for the firm's most eligible bachelor. A cousin, Levi muttered, the bitterness of the espresso matching the tone of his voice. It's a strategic neutralization, Yoko said quietly, adjusting her glasses. She was the firm's lead researcher, the one who lived in the details. If you're married off to someone Camille approves of, you're no longer a threat. You become a fixed point in their social circle. Safe, contained. I don't want to be contained, Levi said, his voice barely a whisper. Then stop letting him hold the leash, Faye said, stepping closer. You've given him your heart for 7 years, Levi, and in return, he gives you a seat at a table next to a stranger so he can keep his secret life intact. When are you going to realize that Rocky Rivero isn't a partner? He's a landlord, and he's overcharging you for the space you take up in his life. Chapter 3. The anticipation. Levi looked at his reflection in the polished black marble of the counter. The tension in the room was palpable, but it wasn't just because of Rocky. There was a shift in the building's energy, a low-frequency hum of gossip that had been vibrating through the hallways since the morning briefing. The specialist from London, Levi said, trying to steer the conversation away from his own crumbling personal life. When does he arrive? Any minute, Chris said, tapping his tablet. The board is in a frenzy. They think he's here to audit the Sterling acquisition, but the rumors from the London branch are more colorful. Apparently he doesn't use the executive entrance. He likes to observe before he engages. He's single, Yoko added, looking up from a dossier. 33. No family ties, no scandals, and a perfect win rate. But the notes say he's unconventional. In London, that usually means he's either a genius or a nightmare. I could use a nightmare, Levi murmured, staring at the elevator bank. At least it would be a change from this dream I'm stuck in. The squad went quiet as the elevator chime echoed through the lounge. It wasn't the usual polite ding. It felt like a signal. Chapter 4. The Sinclair disruption. The doors to the executive lounge didn't just open. They felt like they were dissolved by a surge of new energy. A man walked in who looked like he had been pulled out of a high-fashion editorial and then told a joke he couldn't wait to share. He wasn't wearing the standard-issue gray or navy of a Manhattan firm. He wore a tailored navy blazer over a crisp white shirt with the top 3 buttons undone, revealing a tan chest and a total lack of a tie. Gian Sinclair was 33, radiant, and possessed a frequency that the building wasn't tuned to. He was tall, with messy dark hair that looked like he'd spent the morning running his hands through it, and eyes that sparkled with a dangerous, contagious humor. He didn't look for a receptionist. He didn't look for a desk. He walked straight to the espresso machine, leaned against the marble island right next to Levi, and grinned. So, Gian said, his voice a playful, melodic hum that felt like it was vibrating in Levi's very bones. His accent was thick, posh London, the kind of voice that made every syllable sound like an invitation to a crime. You must be the legendary Levi Carson. I expected more gray hair and a much more miserable facial expression. You're far too attractive to be this successful. It's quite unfair to the rest of us. The squad went completely silent. Faye actually choked on her latte. In a building where Levi was treated with the hushed reverence of a deity, this man was speaking to him like they were at a pub at 2 a.m. I assume you're Gian Sinclair, Levi said, trying to maintain his professional mask, even as he felt a strange, fluttering warmth rise in his throat. The specialist from the London board. Guilty as charged, darling, Gian said, giving a mock bow. He reached out and snatched a blueberry muffin from the tray, taking a large bite with an unapologetic relish. Organic? This firm is posh. Back in London, we survived on cold tea and the sheer spite of our clients. He turned his focus entirely on Levi. His gaze wasn't the heavy, guilt-laden stare of Rocky. It was light, observant, and entirely too perceptive. I've been reading your briefs, Levi, Gian said, his eyes dancing with a humor that felt like a challenge. They're masterpieces of clinical precision. But they're utterly joyless. It's like they were written by a very handsome robot who's forgotten how to have a Saturday night. I've decided my new job isn't auditing your books, it's auditing your personality. We're going to find your sense of humor if I have to sue you for it. Mr. Sinclair, we have a firm to run, Levi countered, though his heart was beginning to throb in a way that felt entirely terrifyingly new. Oh, the firm will be fine. Gian waved a hand dismissively. But look at you. You're standing like you've swallowed a coat hanger. Relax, Levi. The world won't end if you smile. In fact, the building might actually stay upright. Gian leaned in closer, dropping his voice until it was a private, gravelly hum meant only for Levi. He smelled of fresh citrus, expensive soap, and something warm, like sunshine. And look at your partner out there in the hall, Gian whispered, glancing toward the glass wall. In the hallway, Rocky was standing perfectly still, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated jealousy. He was watching Gian Sinclair lean into Levi's space. He was watching the romantic gravity of the room shift in real time. He looks like he's about to have a meltdown because someone is finally making you blush, Gian murmured, his eyes locking onto Levi's. I like him already. He's so dramatic. Gian winked an honest-to-God playful wink. I'm in the penthouse office, Levi. I moved the mahogany desk out and brought in a beanbag chair and a dartboard, Gian said, straightening up and flashing one last brilliant smile. Come up whenever you're ready to stop being a statue and start being a human. I'll even share my secret stash of British chocolate. Gian turned on his heel and walked out, whistling a pop song that had no business being heard in a law firm. Levi stood there, his face feeling suspiciously hot. He looked at the squad. I like him, Chris said immediately. I love him, Faye added, her eyes wide. He's the first person in 7 years to make you look like you actually alive. Levi looked out at Rocky, who was now frantically gesturing for him to come into his office. Then he looked at the elevator where Gian had disappeared. For the first time in 7 years, Levi didn't want to go into Rocky's office. He wanted to go to the penthouse. Chapter 5. The Glass Fortress. The express elevator journey to the 61st floor was usually a moment of decompression for Levi, a 30-second vacuum where the pressures of the lower floors dissolved into the silence of the clouds. But today, the mirrored walls of the lift felt like they were closing in. He stared at his reflection, noting the slight flush in his cheeks that hadn't faded since Gian's departure from the break room. He straightened his velvet blazer, his jaw set in its familiar defensive line. He was the managing partner. He was going up there to re-establish order, to remind this British intruder that Carson Rivero was a temple of discipline, not a playground for charming disruptions. When the doors slid open, the silence he expected was gone, replaced by the warm, crackling sound of a vinyl record. The Ghost Suite had been designed for high-stakes mediation. It was a room of cold marble, imposing walnut panels, and light-absorbing textures meant to make men feel small and vulnerable. But Gian Sinclair had effectively dismantled the intimidation factor within an hour. The $6,000 mahogany desk had been shoved into a corner, currently serving as a resting place for a half-eaten tin of shortbread and a stack of folders. In the center of the room sat a massive neon-orange beanbag chair that looked like a dropped citrus fruit against the dark floor. A professional-grade dartboard was mounted directly onto a priceless walnut pillar. Gian was mid-throw. He had discarded his blazer, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar and rolled up to his elbows, revealing tanned lean forearms. He didn't look like a forensic auditor. He looked like a man who had decided the corporate world was merely a backdrop for his personal amusement. Bullseye! Oh, I am a wizard, Gian cheered as the dart thudded into the center with a satisfying thwack. He turned to Levi, his grin widening until it reached his dark, dancing eyes. You're just in time, darling. I was about to start debating the dartboard, but it's a frightfully dull listener. It just takes everything I throw at it without a single witty objection. Quite unlike you, I expect. His voice was a deep, melodic baritone, colored by a sharp London accent that made every word sound like an invitation to a secret. You turned a multi-million-dollar executive suite into a common room. Mr. Sinclair, Levi said, his voice struggling to maintain its clinical edge as he stepped further into the room. The board expects an audit, not a recreation of a Soho pub. The board expects results. My dear Levi, Gian said, strolling over to a small, sleek fridge tucked under the bar. He pulled out 2 chilled waters and tossed one to Levi. Levi caught it purely by reflex, the cold glass stinging his palm. And I've found that I do my best forensic work when my spine isn't being held together by a chair designed by a man who clearly hated the human form. Sit, please. The beanbag is surprisingly therapeutic for the soul. I'm not sitting in a beanbag. Jian, Levi said, though his eyes lingered on the orange chair. It looked comfortable, far more comfortable than the rigid throne he occupied on the 60th floor. Suit yourself, Jian said, leaning back against the mahogany desk and popping the tab on his water. He watched Levi with a terrifyingly observant gaze, a playful smirk dancing on his lips. So, did the founder's son finish his little wobbler? I saw him pacing the hallway when I left the lounge. He looked like he was about to call the Prime Minister, or perhaps just his tailor to discuss the unprecedented fit of my blazer. Levi felt a familiar, sharp pang of defensive loyalty, but it was weaker than usual. Rocky is protective of the firm's culture. We've spent a decade curating it. No, he's protective of the status quo, Jian corrected softly. He took a slow sip of his water, his dark eyes never leaving Levi's. He treats you like a priceless vase he's terrified someone is going to knock over. It's sweet, in a very suffocating mid-century sort of way. Is he always that possessive, or am I just lucky enough to bring out the beast in him? He looked positively murderous when I winked at you. You shouldn't have done that, Levi whispered, the professional distance he used as a shield beginning to crumble. I shouldn't have done a lot of things, Levi. But life is much more interesting when you ignore the shoulds. Jian laughed, a rich melodic sound that seemed to chase the shadows out of the walnut-paneled room. He stood up and began walking toward Levi, his movements fluid and entirely unhurried. He stopped just inside the boundaries of Levi's personal space close enough that Levi could feel the warmth radiating from him. I've been in this building for precisely 4 hours, Levi. I've seen the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. And I've seen the way you look at your watch every morning at 7:44. Levi's breath hitched. I don't know what you're talking about. I call it the 7:45 rule, Jian whispered, stepping closer still. He smelled of fresh citrus, expensive soap, and something warm, like sunshine on pavement. The doors lock, the world stops. And you give him the only 15 minutes of the day where you re-allowed to be something other than a managing partner. It's a very romantic tragedy you've written for yourself, Levi, but I've always found tragedies a bit too taxing for a Monday, don't you think? You don't know anything about us, Levi hissed, though his heart was hammering against his ribs in a way that felt like a betrayal of everything he had built with Rocky. I know that I'm single, Jian said, his voice dropping to a gravelly, intimate hum. He reached out, his long fingers grazing the velvet of Levi's sleeve. He didn't grab. He just lingered, a light, teasing touch that felt more electric than anything Rocky had given him in months. I know that I do and have a wife waiting at home for me to play the role of the devoted husband. And I know that if I wanted to take the most brilliant man in Manhattan to dinner, I wouldn't make him sit at a head table with a senator. Starter just to protect my daddy's reputation. Jian leaned in, his lips inches from Levi's ear, his warm breath ghosting over Levi's skin. I'm the disruptor, Levi. I'm here to audit the books, yes. But I am also here to tell you that the view out here is much better than the one in that closet you've been living in. And I think you're far too clever not to realize that. Jian pulled back, his eyes sparkling with that same irrepressible wit. He patted Levi's shoulder playfully. Now be a good lad and sit. I found a discrepancy in the London wire transfers that's going to make you laugh, cry, or perhaps just want to buy a one-way ticket to Heathrow. But either way, it's much more interesting than a pinstripe suit. Levi looked at the orange beanbag, then back at the door, and then at Jian. For the first time in 7 years, the 7:45 rule felt like a heavy chain, and the 61st floor felt like the only place he could finally breathe. Levi sat. Chapter 6. The paper trail the afternoon light shifted from a brilliant gold to a deep, bruised purple as it stretched across the 61st floor. Inside the ghost suite, the atmosphere was unlike anything Levi had experienced in his decade of legal practice. Usually, a high-stakes audit was a grim affair, whiteboards covered in red ink, the frantic tapping of keys, and a tension so thick it felt like it might snap. But with Jian, the audit felt like a slow-motion dance. Levi remained in the orange beanbag chair, his initial stiff posture gradually yielding to the gravity of the foam. In front of him, Jian had projected a holographic stream of London wire transfers onto the smoked glass wall. Jian wasn't sitting. He was pacing, a half-eaten digestive biscuit in one hand and a laser pointer in the other. You see that, darling? Jian asked, circling a set of numbers that looked perfectly ordinary to the untrained eye. Every third Thursday of the month, for the last 3 years, exactly £42,000 leaves the London branch. It's marked as consulting fees for a firm called Silver Lake. But here's the kicker, Silver Lake is registered to a P.O. box in the Cotswolds that is currently occupied by a very confused herd of sheep. Levy leaned forward, his analytical mind finally engaging, despite the distraction of Jian's rolled-up sleeves and the playful cadence of his voice. Silver Lake? I've seen that name in the New York ledgers too. Rocky told me they were legacy advisors for the Rivero estate. The legacy excuse. It's the pinstriped version of "the dog ate my homework," Jian said, tossing the laser pointer onto the beanbag next to Levi. He sat down on the floor, crossing his legs and looking up at Levi with a soft, dangerous grin. It's a shell company, Levi, and the money isn't staying with the sheep. It's being funneled back into a private account in Manhattan. An account that requires a very specific biometric signature to access. The room went silent, save for the low hum of the city far below. Levy felt the air turn thin. You think Rocky is embezzling? I think Rocky is building a lifeboat, Jian corrected gently. He reached out, his hand resting on the edge of the beanbag chair, dangerously close to Levi's knee. And I think he's using your brilliance to build the hull. If this ever blows up, his name is nowhere near the final sign-off. Yours is. Levi looked away, his gaze fixing on the city lights. The betrayal felt like a cold stone in his stomach. For 7 years, he had protected Rocky's heart, and for 7 years, Rocky had been preparing a way to leave him behind in the wreckage. Why are you telling me this? Levi whispered. You're here for the board. You could just report this and have us both disbarred. Because I find myself quite fond of you, Levi, Jian said, his voice dropping to a gravelly, intimate register that made the hair on Levi's arms stand up. And because I think a man who can write a merger that beautiful shouldn't be the one going down with a sinking ship. I'm not here to destroy the firm. I'm here to change the name on the door. Jian's hand moved, his fingers grazing the fabric of Levi's trousers. It wasn't a professional touch. It was an invitation. And tonight, at this ghastly gala, you're going to sit at that head table and you're going to watch him. You're going to see the way he looks at the senator's daughter, and then you're going to look at me. And you're going to decide if you want to be a ghost in his story, or the hero of mine. The biometric lock on the penthouse door suddenly chirped. Both men looked up as the glass door slid open. Rocky Rivero stood there, his tuxedo jacket already on, his bow tie undone. He looked at Levi in the beanbag. He looked at Jian on the floor, and his face went from a pale, frantic white to a deep, mottled red. Levi, Rocky hissed, his voice trembling with a mix of authority and pure, unadulterated jealousy. Camille is in the car. The gala starts in 20 minutes. Why are you sitting on the floor with this person? Jian didn't stand up. He just looked over his shoulder at Rocky, a wicked British smirk playing on his lips. We were just discussing the architecture of the Cotswolds, Rocky. Fascinating place. Lots of sheep, very quiet. Almost as quiet as a secret account, wouldn't you say? Rocky flinched, his eyes darting to the holographic projection on the glass, which Jian conveniently swiped into darkness with a flick of his wrist. Levi, let's go, Rocky commanded, stepping into the room to grab Levi's arm. Now. Levi stood up, but he didn't move toward Rocky. He looked at Jian, who was watching him with a calm, expectant gaze. I'll be down in a minute, Rocky, Levi said, his voice steadier than he felt. I need to fix my tie. I can fix it for you, Rocky said, his hand tightening on Levi's sleeve. No, Levi said, gently but firmly pulling his arm away. Jian was just telling me about his secret stash of chocolate. I think I'd like a piece before I face your wife's cousin. Rocky's jaw dropped. He looked at Jian as if the man were a demon that had just offered Levi an apple in Eden, without another word. Rocky turned and marched out, the glass doors sliding shut behind him with a sharp, final click. Jian stood up then, brushing the dust off his trousers. He walked over to Levi, reaching out to straighten the collar of Levi's velvet blazer. His fingers lingered against Levi's neck, the heat of them making Levi's breath hitch. Go on then, darling, Jian whispered, his eyes dark and full of a playful fire. Go play the best friend for one last night, but keep your phone on. I have a feeling the evening is going to need a bit of a British disruption. Chapter 7. The Gala of Ghosts. The grand ballroom of the Pier Hotel was a sea of shimmering silk, expensive perfumes, and the low, predatory hum of Manhattan's elite. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen rain, casting a fractured, Brilliant light over the old guard of the New York Bar Association. Levi Carson sat at the head table, feeling like a specimen under a microscope. To his left was Camille Rivero, looking regal in a gown of emerald lace that matched the cold fire in her eyes. To his right was Elena, the senator's cousin, a woman who was perfectly pleasant, perfectly polished, and perfectly irrelevant. And directly across from him sat Rocky. Rocky looked every bit the founding partner, his tuxedo tailored to emphasize the breadth of his shoulders. But beneath the poise, he was vibrating with a nervous energy that only Levi could detect. Every time Rocky looked at Levi, his eyes would dart to Elena, as if trying to force a connection into existence by sheer will. "You two make such a striking pair," Camille said. Her voice like honey poured over glass as she looked at Levi and Elena. She reached out and patted Rocky's hand, the platinum of her wedding ring clinking against his. "Doesn't Levi look like he finally belongs at this table, Rocky?" Rocky's smile didn't reach his eyes. "He's always belonged at the top, Camille. You know that. But he's been so isolated," Camille continued, her gaze fixed on Levi. "Working those late nights. It's not healthy for a man of 35 to have no life outside the tower. Elena was just telling me about her charity work in D.C. I think she could teach you a thing or two about balance, Levi." Levi took a slow sip of his vintage champagne, the bubbles stinging his throat. He looked at Rocky, hoping for a sign of protest, a spark of the man who had promised him everything in the dark of a locked office. But Rocky just looked down at his plate, his silence a heavy, cowardly weight. "Balance is an interesting concept," Levi said, his voice a calm, resonant hum that cut through Camille's chatter. "But some things are meant to be all-consuming. Don't you agree, Rocky?" Before Rocky could answer, the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. The rhythmic clinking of silverware stopped. The hum of conversation died a sudden, stuttering death. A man was walking down the center aisle of the ballroom, and he was doing it with the effortless confidence of a king reclaiming a throne. Gian Sinclair had arrived. He hadn't worn a traditional tuxedo. He wore a velvet dinner jacket in a deep bruised plum that made everyone else's black tie attire look like a funeral uniform. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the neck, no tie, and his messy dark hair looked like it had been styled by the wind on a very expensive yacht. He didn't look for his assigned seat. He walked straight toward the head table, a playful, wicked smirk on his lips. "Terribly sorry I'm late," Gian said, his posh London accent carrying through the silent room like a melody. "I got caught up in a very intense debate with a taxi driver about the existential merits of a bagel. Utterly fascinating people, New Yorkers." He stopped at the head table, his eyes ignoring Camille, ignoring the senator, and locking directly onto Levi's. "Mr. Sinclair," Camille said, her voice tight with confusion. "I don't believe you were on the guest list for this table." "Oh, I'm never on the list, darling," Gian said, pulling a chair from a neighboring table and sliding it directly between Levi and Elena. The move was so bold, so physically disruptive, that the senator actually dropped his fork. "I'm the specialist, remember? I'm here to audit the atmosphere. And I must say, the family vibe here is a bit dusty." Gian turned to Elena, giving her a wink that was so charming it was practically a crime. "You must be the cousin. Stunning dress? It's a shame you're being used as a human shield. You're far too pretty for litigation." Elena blinked, her mouth falling open. Rocky stood up so fast his chair screeched against the marble floor. "Sinclair, what the hell are you doing?" Rocky hissed, his face flushing a deep, dangerous red. "I'm making a statement, Rocky," Gian said, leaning back and draping an arm over the back of Levi's chair. His fingers grazed Levi's shoulder, a public unashamed touch that made Rocky's eyes bulge. "I've decided that Levi's balance is perfectly fine. He just needs a better class of company. Someone who doesn't mind the light." Gian looked at Levi, his dark eyes sparkling with a humor that felt like a lifeline. "I brought that British chocolate I promised you, Levi, but I think it would taste much better if we ate it while walking through Central Park. This room smells like old paper and broken promises. Shall we?" Levi looked at Camille, who was frozen in shock. He looked at Rocky, whose hand was white-knuckled on the edge of the table, his wedding ring glinting in the light, a symbol of the cage he refused to leave. Then Levi looked at Gian, who was single, who was funny, and who was standing in the middle of Levi's life with a sledgehammer, offering him the sun. For the first time in 7 years, Levi didn't look at his watch. He didn't wait for 7:45. Levi stood up. "The chocolate sounds lovely, Gian," Levi said, his voice clear and steady. He didn't look back at Rocky's stunned face as he stepped away from the head table. He took Jian's offered arm, and together they walked out of the ballroom, leaving the old guard and the Rivero legacy in the shadows where they belonged. Chapter 8. The Midnight Motion. The humid heat of the ballroom vanished the moment they stepped through the pier's revolving doors. The Manhattan night air was crisp, smelling of distant rain and the metallic tang of the city. Behind them, the muffled sound of the orchestra was cut off by the heavy thud of the brass doors, leaving only the rhythmic click of their boots on the sidewalk. Levy didn't stop walking until they reached the low stone wall of Central Park. He leaned against it, his lungs burning as if he'd just run a marathon. The adrenaline was beginning to ebb, leaving behind a terrifying, exhilarating lightness. Jian stood a few feet away, leaning casually against a lamppost. The soft amber light caught the sharp angles of his face and the deep plum of his velvet jacket. He wasn't laughing anymore. He was watching Levi with a quiet, intense focus that made the air between them feel charged. "You realize," Levi said, his voice a bit breathless, "that I just committed professional suicide. Camille will spend the next 48 hours calling every board member she knows. By Monday, I'll be lucky if I'm allowed to practice law in a strip mall." "Oh, please," Jian said, his British accent smoothing over the tension like a balm. He stepped closer, his hands shoved into his pockets. "Camille Rivero is a formidable woman, but she's playing a game from a century that's already ended. You didn't commit suicide, Levi. You filed a motion to dismiss a life that was beneath you." Jian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, gold-wrapped bar of chocolate. He broke off a piece and held it out. Levi took it, his fingers brushing Jian's. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt through him that made Rocky's heaviest embraces feel like static. He ate the chocolate. It was dark, sea-salted, and richer than anything he'd ever tasted. "Better than the senator's cousin?" Jian asked, a playful smirk returning to his lips. "Infinitely," Levi admitted, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through his mask. "Good." Jian took a step closer, closing the distance until the heat of his body was a physical presence. The humor in his eyes had been replaced by something deeper, something raw. "Because I didn't come to New York to audit a firm, Levi. I've seen enough ledgers to last a lifetime. I came here because I read a brief written by a man who seemed to be screaming for help through his footnotes. I came to see if the man was as brilliant as his logic. And?" Levi whispered, his heart hammering against his ribs. "And," Jian said, reaching out to tilt Levy's chin up with a single finger, "I found that the man is far more brilliant. And far more lonely than he has any right to be." Levi looked into Jian's eyes, dark, honest, and entirely unafraid. "I've spent 7 years being a secret, Jian. I don't know how to be anything else. Rocky, he was my entire world. Even if the world was a closet, then let's burn the closet down," Jian murmured. He leaned in, his forehead resting against Levy's. "Rocky Rivero is a man who loves you like a possession. He wants you on a shelf where you're safe and silent. I don't want a possession, Levi. I want a partner. I want the man who can out-argue a Supreme Court justice and then sit on an orange beanbag and eat biscuits with me." "You're impossible," Levi laughed, a shaky, emotional sound. "I'm single, I'm British, and I'm very, very persistent," Jian countered. He didn't wait for a rebuttal. Jian leaned down and captured Levi's lips in a kiss that was everything Rocky's weren't. It wasn't rushed or panicked. It wasn't hidden by the shadows of an office or the ticking of a 7:45 clock. It was slow, confident, and tasted of sea salt chocolate and the future. For the first time in his life, Levi didn't think about the consequences. He didn't think about the Rivero name, the board, or the headlines that would surely follow. He simply wrapped his arms around Jian's neck and kissed him back right there under the lamplight of Fifth Avenue. The silence of the park was suddenly shattered by the screech of tires. A black sedan swerved to the curb a few yards away. The door flung open and Rocky practically tumbled out, his tuxedo disheveled, his face a mask of pure, unhinged fury. "Get away from him!" Rocky screamed, his voice cracking. He marched toward them, his fists clenched, the platinum ring on his finger catching the light like a weapon. "Levi, get in the car. Now. This is over." "I'm calling the police. I'm calling the board. I will ruin him." Jian didn't flinch. He didn't even step back. He simply turned, keeping one arm firmly around Levi's waist, and looked at Rocky with a look of profound, elegant boredom. "Do be quiet, Rocky," Jian said, his accent sharpening into a lethal edge. "The adults are having a conversation." And unless you want the entire bar association to hear about the £42,000 you've been sending to the Cotswolds every month, I suggest you get back in your car and go home to your wife. Rocky froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking gray and hollow in the streetlights. What did you say? I think you heard me, Gian said, his voice a low, dangerous purr. The audit is finished, Rocky, and the verdict is in. You're excused. Chapter 9. The verdict Monday morning arrived with the kind of oppressive, gray humidity that usually signaled a storm over the Hudson. But inside the Carson Rivero Tower, the storm had already broken. The elevator doors opened on the 60th floor at 7:40 a.m. Levi stepped out, his stride long and deliberate. He wasn't wearing the midnight blue velvet of a secret lover or the charcoal gray of a corporate soldier. He wore a sharp, tailored black suit with a white shirt open at the collar. He looked like a man who had finally stopped negotiating with his own life. He walked past the squad's desk. Faye, Chris, and Yoko were already there, their faces illuminated by the glow of multiple monitors. They didn't say a word, but Faye gave him a sharp, slow nod. She had a file open, the Silver Lake file. It was ready. Levi reached his office door. He didn't check his watch. It was 7:44 a.m. He stepped inside and closed the door. He didn't lock it. He stood by the window, watching the rain begin to streak the glass. A moment later, the door swung open. Rocky marched in. He hadn't slept. The shadows under his eyes were deep, and his hair, usually so perfect, was slightly frayed. He looked at Levi, and for the first time in 10 years, he didn't reach out. He stayed by the door, his hands trembling. You stayed with him, Rocky said, his voice a jagged whisper. The car stayed at the hotel, but you didn't come home, Levi. You didn't answer my calls. I was busy, Rocky, Levi said, turning slowly. I was looking at the legacy you were so desperate to protect. I was looking at the sheep in the Cotswolds. Rocky's face went ash gray. Levi, I can explain that. It was a contingency. For us. So we could leave. So we could be free. Stop, Levi commanded, and the sheer authority in his voice made Rocky flinch. You didn't build a lifeboat for us. You built a lifeboat for your reputation. You pinned those transfers to my authorization codes, Rocky. If the board ever found out, I was the one who was going to jail while you mourned me from your villa in Italy. I would never— You already did, Levi said. He felt a strange, cold peace. The man standing before him wasn't the hero of his youth. He was just a scared man in an expensive suit. You loved me in the dark because you were too cowardly to face the light. And you used me to build a fortress you could hide in. The office door opened again. Gian walked in, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. He looked entirely too refreshed for someone who had been up half the night. He was wearing a light gray suit that made him look like a silver blade. Morning, all, Gian chirped, his British accent slicing through the tension like a hot knife. He walked straight to Levi and handed him a cup. The espresso machine downstairs is broken, so I had to find a charming little cart on the corner. The man called me Governor. I think I'm staying. Gian turned to Rocky, his smile turning sharp. Still here, Rocky? I thought you'd be halfway to the airport by now. The board is meeting in the conference room in 10 minutes. I've already sent them the sheep dossier. You're destroying me, Rocky hissed, looking between the two of them. Everything we built, Levi. You're throwing it away for a man you met 3 days ago? I'm not throwing it away, Levi said, stepping toward the door. I'm closing the case. You were a bad precedent, Rocky, and I've finally found a better argument. Levi walked out of the office, his shoulder brushing Gian's as he passed. He didn't look back at Rocky, who was left standing in the center of the room he no longer owned. Chapter 10. The closing statement. The penthouse didn't smell like the Rivero estate. It didn't smell like old money, floor wax, or the cold metallic scent of the 745 rule. It smelled like rain, expensive gin, and the quiet, heavy silence of a war that had finally ended. Gian stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass, the city lights reflecting in his eyes like distant embers. Behind him, the sheep dossier, the leverage that had kept them in chains, was nothing but a pile of ash in a designer wastebasket. It's done, Levi said, his voice rougher than usual. He stepped into the light, shedding his suit jacket like he was shedding a skin he never chose to wear. He didn't look like a possession anymore. He looked like the man who had burned the closet down. Gian turned, a slow, dangerous smirk tugging at his lips. The kind of look that used to terrify the board members, but now it was only for Levi. The headlines are already hitting. Rivero Empire collapses. Family secrets unearthed. They're looking for someone to blame, but there's no one left to find. Levi walked toward him, stopping only when their chests almost brushed. The power dynamic had shifted. It wasn't about who owned whom anymore. It was about who survived together. So, Levi murmured, his eyes locked on Jian's. What's the closing statement? Jian reached out, his fingers tracing the line of Levi's jaw, not a claim, but a promise. He leaned in, his breath hot against Levi's ear, whispering the final words of their old life. The 745 rule is dead, Jian whispered. From now on, we don't answer to the clock. We don't answer to the name. We only answer to each other. He pulled back, looking out at the city they had just set on fire, metaphorically and literally. The statement is simple, Levi. We are the only ones left standing. This concludes our time together for now, but as one door closes, another is about to be unlocked. We often think that the stories we choose define us, but really, it's the mysteries we haven't solved yet that keep us moving forward. I want to thank you for being part of this experience and for letting these words find a home with you. The journey doesn't end here. It simply changes shape. Thank you so much for listening. If you're ready for the next mystery, please like and subscribe if you haven't joined yet. Your support means everything as we prepare for what's coming. Leave a comment down below and let me know your theories on what's next. I'll see you in the next story.